You've heard me talk about the four principles by which America views the world. That is the primacy of the person, or the person as the object of government. Peace as the natural end of man, the rule of law, and this idea of a community of nations. Well, these ideas are very important to right structure different societies and to right structure the societies of the world. And when America came about, you had 13 little countries or 13 little colonies. So when those four principles realized themselves for the first time in a very meaningful way was when those 13 little countries got together and decided on independence and then formed a more perfect union with the Constitution and established the United States of America. So, what we're going to talk about today is a bit of history that a lot of people don't know much about, but it was actually very beneficial for the whole world. And what I want to talk about today are the Lake Mohonk Conferences, which I may have referenced one time or so before. These conferences ran from 1883 to 1916. They began in 1883 to talk about the condition of the Indians and bringing the American Indians up to a certain level of civilization. In 1890, the conversations turned to the development of blacks or Negroes, and in 1895, the conversations turned towards world peace and more. So, what is Lake Mohonk? It's a mountain house which is still there. It was started, Mountain House or Resort was a historic Victorian style castle founded in 1869 by the Smiley family. The Smileys were Quakers. It's located in New Paltz, New York. It's about 90 miles north of New York City, and it's besides Lake Mohonk on the Shawangunk Ridge. Um, the Lake Mohonk conferences that I'm talking about were organized by two twin brothers, Albert Smiley and Alfred Smiley, and of course both were Quakers. And they started these conferences to improve people's lives, as I've mentioned. What I want to talk about is their plans for world peace beginning in 1895 and lasting until 1916. Um, which is during the First World War. The attendees of these conferences were really, in many ways, the best and brightest of America. They were educators, they were businessmen, they were lawyers, and I mean, well, um, well respected lawyers, well respected businessmen, well respected educators. You had politicians, statesmen, you had diplomats, and you had representatives from foreign countries over time. The numbers grew over time. I believe they had over 300 or 350 at one point. And what the conference began with was a discussion of arbitration. And that idea was using reason and law to bring about peace in the world between countries because war was an enormous waste. And one of the speakers said it very well. He said, "quote Where law and reason are, Christ's words may be spoken." End of quote. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you about Lake Mohonk, unless indicated otherwise, is from a paper called American Internationalism from 2005 by Cecile Reed. That was her doctoral paper, her doctoral dissertation for a PhD in history. So, what the founders of the Mohonk Mountain House conferences started out with was this desire to bring peace in the world through arbitration, and they saw peace and law as being deeply connected. Okay, now remember I talked to you about four things, peace, rule of law, law of nations, community of nations, and then the importance of the person. Well, here we got two elements right here. Peace and law are essential for there to be peace in the world. They go together, in other words. And so arbitration became a very important topic. These people who went to Mohonk weren't talking about conquest of territories. They weren't talking about dominion of peoples. They weren't talking about war. They were talking about bringing peace to the world. Okay? Peace to the world because it's good in itself. And these Mohonk conferences were very influential. They're very, very important. They helped shape the 20th century going into the 21st century in bringing peace and prosperity to the world. And it's a part of American history a lot of people don't know about, but it's very, very important. Okay, so in August of 1898, the Tsar of Russia issued a rescript calling on the countries of the world to get together and talk about at The Hague some peace conference, and they came up with some topics. The reality is that the Tsar was motivated by the Mohonk Conferences. The Mohonk Conferences led to Hague number 1 in 1899. And in fact, the Mohonk Conferences was the model for The Hague. And at The Hague in 1899, this is Hague number 1, there were 2 Hagues. The third one was planned, but it never materialized in 1914 because World War One began. So Hague 1 was in 1899, Hague in Holland. The Americans, we were truly ascendant there. We pushed for an arbitral court, and we got it. We got the world to agree that there would be a permanent court of arbitral justice that was established in 1900 that the countries would go to resolve their disputes. They would use, law, and they would talk, and they would use reason, and that would bring about peace and avoid war. And so American stock really rose at that point because we were the big winners there. If you read and our win was the win for humanity. And if you read about what happened at Hague 1, we were very instrumental in keeping all the parties together, especially Germany, to keep them in these discussions for the purpose of the Permanent Court of Arbitral Justice and for other reasons. So what happened over time is that the Mohonk conferences grew into this promoting these ideas of promoting universal public opinion, because public opinion is very important for governments to do the right thing. Along with this, the Mohonk conferences, promoted this idea of republican government, the idea of commerce, as well as arbitration, personal rights, and eventually a union of states or a federation along the lines of the United States, which became known as, quote, the peace nation of the world, end of quote, as some of the attendees at the Mohonk called the United States and considered the United States. We are the peace nation of the world, end of quote. Again, the discussions are about creating a peaceful, orderly existence on Earth, stopping war between countries. It's all these guys were talking about, and that's what they wanted to bring about. And America got a big boost when President Teddy Roosevelt negotiated the peace deal between Japan and Russia. As a result of a war that Russia and Japan got involved in around 1905, he negotiated the end of that, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. The result was Hague II, which was convened in 1907, was really an American project. America, with Teddy Roosevelt as president, essentially called that meeting because Russia couldn't do it. No other country really wanted to do it. But it provided another forum for the countries of the world to get together and talk about issues dealing with peace and war. And one important decision that came out of this was the principle of compulsory arbitration of disputes between countries as a matter of principle for all countries of the world. And what you had before is you had oftentimes countries would negotiate treaties with each other, and they'd say, okay, if we have a problem, we'll arbitrate or we'll mediate. That idea went all the way back to Hugo Grotius in 1625, who said, when you have a peace treaty, try to mediate the thing. If you want to avoid war, try to arbitrate matters. And so the Americans picked that up and took that forward and made it a principle of international law, of international relations at Hague II in 1907. Increasingly, as time went on, America was viewed as the hope of the world. We had a tiny military. At one point, I'm reading about the Hague Conference, and it's like the Americans said, these limits on arms, they don't really apply to us because we don't have much of a military. So it was really actually kind of a funny discussion. But the Europeans had huge militaries, and they were getting bigger because the Europeans were getting ready for war, and they were going to fight over land and over power and for nationalist pride and for economic might and for glory and all this stuff. But America just simply wanted to bring peace to the world. We wanted peace. And we wanted people to sit down and talk about peace. And this continued on with the Mohonk Conferences until 1916. It became evident that the world was embroiled in this World War One. But the ideas that came from the Mohonk and the efforts at Mohonk got the attention of Pope Pius X, who lauded the Americans, lauded James Brown Scott for what we were doing to bring peace to the world. And so the principles that developed at Mohonk are very important. Like I said, they played all throughout the history of the 20th century and into the 21st century in building this community of nations and bringing peace to the world. Daniel Hucker, in an article called the Lake Mohonk Conferences of International Arbitration, wrote, quote, the 22 Mohonk Conferences did have an enduring legacy. That's from 1895, 1916. The 22 Mohonk Conferences did have an enduring legacy, influencing the subsequent development of ideas and mechanisms in the direction of international law and organization. End of quote. He goes on to say that President Woodrow Wilson, February 14th, 1919, said that the future League of Nations relied, quote, chiefly upon one great force, and that is the moral force of the public opinion of the world, end of quote. So why are we talking about the public opinion of the world? Because the people are ultimately the ones who fight the wars. And the people, um, our opinion has a check on governments and on what governments do. And what we saw with World War One and with World War Two, really, for all the big wars, they're started by tyrants or monarchs, by one person or two people who decide they're going to plunge the country into war. They don't put it up to the vote for the people. It's not up to some democratic process or public opinion. It really doesn't matter all that much. It just gets manipulated to support the war of the tyrant. And America and our thinkers and so many other thinkers of the past saw that public opinion is crucial to making sure that there is peace in the world. And so what happened to in Mohonk is there was this idea that the world could be formed peacefully um, in accordance with a federation like the United States. And this idea continued into the 1920s, and I think it's even continued to today. It's been written about quite a bit. And so this confederation would bring peace, and it would keep in mind that power is ultimately with the people. The public opinion is crucial. Public international opinion is crucial. Republican form of government is the best way to ensure peace and that countries don't go to war. And you know, in addition to that, is this idea of the rule of law or the law of nations governing the relations of the countries. So I know a lot of this is very theoretical, and I want to talk about something, go over the past before Mohonk very briefly, because that's probably another hour. But you had other efforts to create peace in the world going all the way in modern times, going back to Henry XIV, his grand design in 1603, going through William Penn in 1693, with Abbe Saint Pierre in 1713, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in 1761, Pierre Andre Gargache in 1782, whose work was printed by Ben Franklin, by the way, Jeremy Bentham in 1786, which I don't think was very practical, and then Immanuel Kant, A Perpetual Peace in 1795. And you had all these different efforts in the past that did not come to fruition. And I analyzed them, and why didn't they come to fruition? Well, because um, these thinkers were dealing with monarchies. They were dealing with absolute rulers, dealing with tyrants. Well, tyrants don't want their power to be limited. And what you have to do to limit their power is to get the Republican form of government where people have a say on whether they're going to go to war or not, because they got to fight the war. And so people will mostly opt for war and peace and commerce. Another reason that these efforts really didn't come to fruition, I believe, is because they dealt with balances of power. They dealt with which we saw with the Council of Vienna in 1815, and which we saw, up until 1914. You have these power blocks, these alliances, and was simply that is simply not enough. To allow for peace in the world, and what we're seeing with multipolarity now is the same idea. It's coming back, of balances of power, power blocks. Well, that doesn't work. It doesn't keep the peace. It just means you get bigger, bloodier wars. Um, these other options, so we have two reasons why they failed. One, they talked about balances of power. They dealt with monarchies, and the monarchs were going to give up their power. They wanted the ability to determine war and peace. Third of all, these other proposals, well, I will say, with the exception of Immanuel Kant, who advocated for Republican government, who advocated for a rule of law and an international confederation, or an international arrangement. But the third big thing that was missing from most of these proposals was this idea of the rule of law. And you can't have a balance of power without a rule of law, because then you're just going to get force, the rule of force. And America understood all this, and we established the republic form of government in our country, and other countries adopted the Republican form of government, and we became peaceful. And important to that Republican form of government was this idea of the rule of law and the rights of the person. And actually, Immanuel Kant in Perpetual Peace talks very eloquently a lot of the principles, and that came out in 1795. A lot of the principles which, in many ways, inform also the American worldview and are part of the American worldview and coincide with or associated with the American point of view, and have very real value to the world. And so I think that one thing we have to realize is that Lake Mohonk was very important in bringing peace to the world, because these principles of reason, of law, of arbitration, of building connections with people, promoting, business, promoting the intercourse between countries, promoting personal rights. All of these things, very important to structuring a peaceful and beneficial world order. And Lake Mohonk was absolutely essential to getting the ball rolling in this regard. And it's a little bit of history that's been forgotten, but it shows the goodness of America and the beneficial nature of America. Because the people who went to these conferences for 22, 23 years weren't talking about empire. They weren't talking about genocide. They were talking about peace for everybody and making everybody's life better. So that's it for today. Thank you. And that's the nature of America. Make everybody's life better, bring peace, rule of law, person, community of nations. Thank you.